The distress signal came through during a routine supply check. Dr. Rebecca Cross looked up from her inventory tablet as the communications panel lit up with an emergency frequency. The TSS Nightingale had been running medical supplies to the frontier colonies for 3 years now, and distress calls were nothing new in this part of space. "We have wounded," Rebecca said to her small crew. "Looks like it came from that border dispute we heard about last week." David Lynn, the senior nurse, pulled up the coordinates. "It's about 4 hours away. We have enough medical supplies for maybe 30 patients, depending on injuries." Patricia Walsh, the ship's surgeon, was already preparing the medical bay. "Let's go. That's what we're here for." The Nightingale was not a military vessel. It carried no weapons, no shields strong enough to stop a serious attack. The entire hull was painted white with large red crosses visible from every angle. 3 different languages announced its medical status on continuous broadcast. Every species in the galaxy understood what those symbols meant. Medical ships were sacred ground, even in war. Henry Brooks guided the ship toward the coordinates. Through the view screen, they could see debris floating in the darkness. Pieces of destroyed vessels drifted past, some still glowing from recent explosions. This border skirmish had been worse than the reports suggested. They found survivors in damaged escape pods, refugees from both sides of the conflict, all of them injured and desperate. The Nightingale's crew worked quickly, bringing the wounded aboard. Rebecca moved from bed to bed, assessing injuries and directing treatment. Burns, broken bones, radiation exposure. Standard casualties from ship-to-ship combat. "Dr. Cross," a young orderly named Tim Reed called out. "This child needs immediate attention." Rebecca rushed over to find a small alien child, barely breathing, with severe internal injuries. She worked for 2 hours to stabilize the patient. Around her, the medical bay filled with the sounds of suffering and healing. This was the work they had chosen. This was why they flew into dangerous space with no weapons to protect them. The Nightingale had treated 42 patients when the sensors detected incoming ships. Henry checked the readings twice before calling down to the medical bay. His voice was tight with concern. "Dr. Cross, we have wrack in war. Cruisers approaching, 3 of them." Rebecca felt her stomach drop. The Vraken were known for their aggressive military tactics, but they had never attacked a medical vessel before. No one did. It was the one universal rule that every species respected. "Broadcast our medical status," Rebecca ordered. "Make sure they know we're non-combatant." The communications array sent out every identification code in their system. Medical vessel. Civilian crew. Protected under galactic conventions. The messages repeated in multiple languages, including Vraken. The war cruisers did not slow down. Henry tried hailing them directly. "Vraken vessels, this is the medical ship Nightingale. We are treating wounded from both sides of the conflict. We are unarmed and operating under medical neutrality protocols." No response came back. The first weapons strike hit the Nightingale's engine section. The ship shuddered violently, throwing people and equipment across the medical bay. Emergency lights flickered on as main power failed. Rebecca grabbed onto a support beam as another explosion rocked the vessel. "They're firing on us," Henry's voice came through the intercom, disbelief clear in his tone. "They're actually firing on a medical ship." The second strike destroyed the communications array. The third took out the escape pods. The fourth killed the engines completely. The Nightingale drifted helplessly in space, unable to run, unable to call for help, unable to fight back. Docking clamps seized the ship's hull with a grinding metal screech. Boarding parties were coming. Rebecca looked at her patients. Some were already dead from the attack. Others lay injured and terrified in their beds. David and Patricia stood frozen, unsure what to do. They were doctors and nurses, not soldiers. They had no weapons, no training for combat. "Stay with the patients," Rebecca said quietly. "Maybe if they see we're just medical staff, they'll let us go." The Vraken soldiers burst through the airlocks wearing full combat armor. They moved through the ship with weapons raised, checking every corridor and room. When they reached the medical bay, Rebecca stepped forward with her hands raised. "We are medical personnel," she said clearly. "These are wounded refugees. We are protected under galactic medical conventions." The Vrakan commander looked at her through his helmet visor. His voice came through with mechanical distortion. "You aid the weak, you prolong suffering, you enable those who should die in battle to live another day." "That's what doctors do," Rebecca replied. "We heal people." The commander raised his weapon. "Mercy is for the weak." Rebecca tried to speak again, tried to make them understand, but the words died in her throat as weapons fire filled the medical bay. She watched Patricia fall, then David, saw patients killed in their beds, saw Tim Reed try to shield the small child and fail. The pain came suddenly as weapons fire caught her in the chest. Rebecca collapsed, her vision blurring. Through fading consciousness, she heard the Vrakan soldiers moving through the ship, making sure their work was thorough. She heard the commander speaking into his communicator. "Target destroyed, all personnel eliminated. Medical status is irrelevant to Vrakan military doctrine." The last thing Rebecca saw before darkness took her was the child patient, somehow still alive, crying silently in the ruins of the medical bay. Hours later, a trading vessel picked up the Nightingale's automated distress beacon. They found 3 survivors among the 47 dead. Dr. Rebecca Cross, barely alive, Tim Reed, unconscious from blood loss, and 1 small refugee child orphaned twice in the same week. The news reached Earth 4 days later through the Galactic Communication Network. A human medical ship, clearly marked and broadcasting its protected status, had been deliberately attacked. The crew had been executed. The patients had been murdered. The Galactic Council called an emergency session. Human Ambassador Williams stood before hundreds of species representatives and demanded justice. She presented evidence, showed the broadcast logs, displayed the Nightingale's medical credentials. The Vrakan representative stood and spoke without hesitation. "The vessel was harboring enemy combatants. Our forces acted within acceptable military parameters." Species after species voted for strong condemnation of the attack. They issued formal statements of concern. They suggested compensation might be appropriate. They debated the exact wording of their disapproval. Not one of them called it a war crime. Not one of them demanded arrests. Not one of them suggested real consequences. Ambassador Williams gathered her documents and walked out of the council chamber. Her delegation followed in complete silence. As they left, she sent a single encrypted message back to Earth. "They won't help. The Nightingale crew died for nothing unless we do something about it." Earth's response came within hours. Not to the Galactic Council, not to the Vrakan Empire. The message went directly to every human colony, every human ship, every human military installation across known space. One word changed everything. Geneva. The word meant nothing to most species in the galaxy. Geneva was just another human place name, like Paris or Tokyo or New York. But every human who heard it understood immediately what was coming next. Earth's history with warfare was long and brutal. Humans had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of killing each other. They had developed weapons that could destroy entire cities in seconds. They had fought wars that killed millions. They had done terrible things to each other in the name of victory. And somewhere along that blood-soaked path, they had learned something important. Wars needed rules. Even in the darkest moments of conflict, there had to be lines that nobody crossed. The Geneva Conventions were humanity's attempt to draw those lines. Medical personnel were protected. Prisoners had rights. Civilians were off-limits. Hospital ships were sacred. It had taken Earth 2 world wars and over 100 million dead to learn these lessons. The galaxy was about to benefit from that education. President Catherine Moore sat in the Situation Room surrounded by military advisors and diplomatic staff. On the screen in front of her, Dr. Rebecca Cross lay in a hospital bed, barely able to speak through her injuries. The doctors said she would survive, but the scars would never fully heal. Tell me what you saw, Catherine said gently. Rebecca's voice was weak but steady. They knew what we were, they saw the medical symbols, they heard our broadcasts, they didn't care, they executed everyone, the patients, the crew, everyone. And they left you alive. As a message, Rebecca said. The commander said mercy was for the weak, he wanted survivors to spread fear. Catherine closed the video feed and looked at the military personnel around the table. Fleet Admiral Jessica Hunt sat with her hands folded, waiting patiently. She had been reviewing human military doctrine for 3 days straight. Admiral, what are our options? Jessica pulled up a tactical display. The Vracan Empire has approximately 200 warships spread across 15 systems. They're a warrior culture focused on expansion through military conquest. Strong on aggression, weak on strategy. They fight like they're still swinging swords instead of firing plasma weapons. Can we beat them? In a straight fight, yes. We have better tactics, better training, better coordination. But that's not really the question, is it? Catherine understood. The question is what kind of victory we want. Exactly, we could glass their planets from orbit. We could wipe them out in a month, but that would make us the monsters. Jessica changed the display to show a different plan. Or we can teach them why the Geneva Conventions exist. The plan was elegant in its precision. No attacks on civilian targets, no orbital bombardments, no collective punishment. Just surgical strikes against military targets and a systematic hunt for the specific individuals who had ordered and carried out the Nightingale attack. We're going to put them on trial, one advisor asked. We're going to show the galaxy what accountability looks like, Catherine replied. Earth sent its formal ultimatum to the Vracan Empire 3 days later. The message was simple and direct. Surrender the individuals responsible for the Nightingale attack within 30 days. They would face trial for war crimes according to human legal standards. The Vracan Empire would issue a formal apology and agree to respect medical neutrality in all future conflicts. The penalty for refusal was not specified. It didn't need to be. The Vracan High Command received the ultimatum and laughed. They broadcast their response across the entire galaxy, making sure every species could hear their mockery. Humans should learn their place among warrior species. We do not apologize for strength. We do not submit to the weak. Your medical vessel enabled our enemies. You got what you deserved. They even released footage of the attack, presenting it as a training video for their military academies. This is how you deal with those who interfere in Vracan military operations, the narrator explained. Show no mercy, leave a message. The galactic response was exactly what the Vracan expected. Most species issued statements supporting Earth's right to seek compensation. Some suggested mediation. A few offered to help negotiate a settlement. Everyone assumed Earth would eventually back down. Humans were. New to galactic politics, they would learn how things worked. But Earth was not backing down. Instead, they were mobilizing. Fleet Admiral Hunt stood in the command center of the orbital shipyard above Earth, watching as military vessels prepared for deployment. The fleet had been in maintenance mode for decades. Humanity had not fought a major war since they reached the stars. The ships were older designs, some dating back 50 years. But the crews were ready. Every human military member trained constantly on historical battles from Earth's past. They studied everything from ancient Roman tactics to modern naval warfare. They practiced coordination drills until ships moved like schools of fish in perfect synchronization. The 30-day deadline approached. Diplomatic channels stayed busy as various species tried to convince Earth to compromise. The Vracan Empire conducted military exercises near human trade routes, trying to intimidate the young species into submission. Earth said nothing. The fleet simply moved into position. On day 28, the Vracan Empire sent a private message to Earth's government. They offered limited compensation and a vague expression of regret. They suggested both sides could move past this unfortunate incident. President Moore's response was 3 words: surrender the criminals. On day 29, several older species who remembered humanity's violent history sent warnings to the Vracan Empire. The message was ignored. The Vracan had studied human military capabilities and found them adequate but not exceptional. They believed they could handle whatever response came. On day 30, at exactly the moment the deadline expired, Earth sent one final transmission. It went to every species in the galaxy simultaneously. The message was brief. The Geneva Conventions are now in force. All parties engaged in warfare are advised that medical neutrality will be enforced. War crimes will be prosecuted. There are rules to war, and humanity remembers what happens when those rules are ignored. The transmission ended. For 5 seconds, nothing happened. Then the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at Hadris Station, the primary Vracan military staging ground. 50 warships appeared in perfect formation, weapons powered but not yet firing. Admiral Hunt sent one message to the Vracan defenders. You attacked a hospital ship. You executed medical personnel. You murdered patients in their beds. Under the laws of warfare established by humanity through painful experience, you have committed war crimes. Surrender now or we will take you by force. This is your only warning. The Vracan commander at Hadris Station responded with weapons fire. Admiral Hunt nodded to her tactical officer. Show them what we learned in our wars. Begin the lesson. The battle for Hadris Station lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the Vracan military presence was destroyed. Human casualties were minimal, and the galaxy had just witnessed something they had never seen before. Humanity fighting a war with rules. The Vracan defenders at Hadris Station had expected a fight. They got a demonstration instead. Human ships moved through space like they were performing a carefully choreographed dance. Every movement served a purpose. Every shot hit its target. Nothing was wasted. Vracan tactics relied on overwhelming force and aggressive positioning. They charged forward, fired everything, and counted on their armor to absorb return fire. It worked well against most species who fought the same way. Humans fought differently. They used feints and flanking maneuvers. They coordinated fire across multiple ships to overwhelm specific targets. They predicted Vracan movements and positioned themselves to exploit every mistake. It was not just fighting. It was warfare refined through thousands of years of bloody experience. The Vracan lost 23 warships at Hadris Station. Human losses totaled 0 ships destroyed, with minor damage to 3 vessels. The tactical advantage was so overwhelming that most galactic observers assumed humans had secret technology. They did not. They just knew how to fight. But the strangest moment came after the battle ended. A Vracan supply ship had taken critical damage during the engagement. The crew abandoned the vessel and broadcast a distress signal, expecting to die in the cold of space. Vracan military doctrine had no provisions for rescuing defeated enemies. Human military doctrine did. Admiral Hunt ordered the medical frigate Mercy forward. Human rescue teams pulled 37 Vracan sailors from their damaged lifeboats. They brought them aboard, treated their injuries, and gave them food and water. The Vracan prisoners sat in confusion, waiting for torture or execution. Neither came. Instead, a human doctor named Robert Mills explained their situation through a translator device. You are prisoners of war. Under human military law, you will be treated with dignity. You will receive medical care. You will be fed. You will be allowed to send messages to your families. You will not be harmed. One Vracan officer, a veteran of 15 battles, could not understand. We lost. We are your enemies. Why do you show mercy? Robert looked at the injured warrior. Because we learned what happens when we don't. Because someone has to break the cycle. Because you followed orders from commanders who were wrong. The Vracan prisoners were transferred to a secure facility on a neutral station. They were given clean quarters, regular meals, and access to communication systems. Human guards treated them firmly but fairly. Every interaction was recorded and broadcast to the galaxy. This confused most species. Victory meant domination. Enemies were resources to be exploited or threats to be eliminated. Showing kindness to defeated foes seemed counterproductive. But humanity was not trying to dominate the Vraken. They were trying to change them. The next phase of Earth's operation began 2 weeks after Hadris Station. Human intelligence had spent those weeks tracking down every Vraken officer involved in the Nightingale attack. Command staff, ship captains, the boarding party leader, even the propaganda officer who had turned the massacre into a training video. 16 individuals across 6 different star systems. Admiral Hunt assigned specialized teams to each target. They were not invasion forces. They were extraction units. Small groups of highly trained soldiers who moved fast, hit hard, and disappeared before reinforcements could arrive. The first target was a Vraken naval base on the planet Torvin. Commander Drac had ordered the attack on the Nightingale from his comfortable office, then celebrated with his staff over drinks. He was having lunch when human soldiers appeared in his dining room. The extraction took 4 minutes. Drac was sedated, secured, and removed from the building before base security even realized something was wrong. The human team left behind a single message written in Vraken's script on the commander's desk. War crimes have consequences. Similar operations played out across Vraken space over the next month. Officers were pulled from military academies, command stations, even personal residences. The Vraken. Military tried to defend against the raids, but could not predict where humans would strike next. Their defenses were designed to stop invasions, not surgical extractions. The galaxy watched in fascination as humanity hunted specific individuals across an entire empire. It was unprecedented. Wars were fought over territory, resources, or ideology. Nobody invaded an empire just to arrest a few people. Unless those people had committed war crimes. The captured Vraken officers were brought to a neutral space station called Crossroads, operated by an alliance of minor species. Human legal teams had converted an entire section of the station into a courtroom. Galactic media were invited to observe. The trials would be public. Chief Prosecutor Amanda Foster stood before the assembled court and explained the process. We are here to establish accountability for actions taken during military operations. The defendants are charged with war crimes including the deliberate targeting of medical personnel, execution of non-combatants, and violation of protected status. The Vraken defense attorney, provided by Earth's own legal system, argued that his clients had followed Vraken military doctrine. How can they be criminals for following their own laws? Amanda's response was simple. Because some laws are wrong, because certain actions are crimes regardless of who orders them, because saying you followed orders is not a defense when the orders were to murder doctors. The evidence was overwhelming. Communication logs showing the deliberate decision to attack despite knowing the Nightingale's medical status. Helmet camera footage from the boarding party showing the executions. Testimony from the 3 survivors. The propaganda video that celebrated the massacre. The defense tried to argue military necessity. They claimed the Nightingale was aiding enemy combatants. Amanda presented ship logs showing that patients from both sides of the conflict had been treated equally. These doctors saved lives, she said quietly. They did not care which side someone fought for. They just cared that people were hurt and needed help. Your clients killed them for that. They executed wounded prisoners. They murdered medical staff who could not fight back. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Galactic observers from over 40 species attended. Many had never seen a war crimes prosecution before. The concept itself was alien to most cultures. You won wars or you lost them. What happened during the fighting was just the cost of conflict. But humans had learned differently. They had fought wars that nearly destroyed their own species. They had seen what happened when there were no rules, no limits, no accountability. The Geneva Conventions were written in the blood of millions who had died in conflicts without mercy. The verdicts came down on a Tuesday afternoon, Galactic Standard Time. All 16 defendants were found guilty. Sentences ranged from 30 years imprisonment to execution for the most senior commanders who had deliberately ordered the attack. Commander Drac received life imprisonment. The boarding party leader who had personally killed Dr. Patricia Walsh was sentenced to death. The propaganda officer got 25 years for glorifying war crimes. The Vracan Empire protested, but the sentences were carried out according to human judicial protocols. Fair, transparent, and final. But something unexpected happened during those trials. Young Vracan officers watching the proceedings began to question their own military doctrine. If humans could win battles easily while still following rules, maybe the rules were not weakness. Maybe they were strength. A resistance movement started quietly in Vracan space. Junior officers refusing orders that violated the Geneva Conventions. Soldiers questioning commanders who targeted civilians. A fundamental shift in thinking that had started with one destroyed medical ship. Earth had not just won battles, they were winning something much more important. They were winning the argument. The trials had been running for 2 months when the Vracan hardliners made their desperate move. They were losing the war in every way that mattered. Their ships were being destroyed in battle. Their officers were being prosecuted as criminals. Their own junior ranks were starting to question orders. The military doctrine they had followed for generations was crumbling. So they decided to break humanity's will through terror. The target was New Perth, an agricultural colony with 2 million human inhabitants, mostly farmers, engineers, and their families. No military installations, no strategic resources, just people trying to build a life on a frontier world. The bioweapon was delivered through orbital dispersal. Invisible particles spread across the atmosphere and settled into the water. Supply, by the time doctors identified the disease, it was already infecting thousands. The pathogen was designed specifically to attack human respiratory systems. It spread through air contact, had a 3-day incubation period, and a mortality rate near 40% without treatment. The Vracan scientists who created it had done thorough research on human biology. Governor Lisa Chen sent the first distress call from New Perth after hospitals started overflowing. "We have an outbreak, unknown pathogen, spreading faster than we can track. We need help immediately." Earth's response teams arrived within days, but the disease was already out of control. Medical facilities built for normal operations could not handle the surge. Bodies piled up in temporary morgues. Healthcare workers collapsed from exhaustion trying to save people faster than the disease could kill them. The death toll climbed steadily. 1,000, 5,000, 10,000, 20,000. The Vracan Empire broadcast their responsibility for the attack. They explained their reasoning in clear terms. Humanity needed to understand that continuing this war would result in catastrophic civilian losses. They could end this easily by accepting Vracan terms for peace. The galaxy watched to see how Earth would respond. Most species expected massive retaliation. Human orbital strikes against Vracan civilian centers, perhaps even a bioweapon response in kind. It would be justified under most species' concepts of warfare. President Catherine Moore sat in the Situation Room watching casualty reports scroll across screens. Her military advisors had prepared strike plans. Intelligence had mapped every Vracan population center. They could kill millions in retaliation within hours. "We have the capability to respond with similar weapons," Admiral Hunt said quietly. "We could deploy biological agents against their major cities. The death toll would be comparable to what they inflicted on New Perth." Catherine stared at the screens showing hospitals full of dying civilians. She thought about the children in those beds, thought about the families destroyed by this attack, thought about how easy it would be to make the Vracan Empire suffer the same way. "No," she said finally, "we don't do that." "Madam President, they killed civilians deliberately. They targeted a colony with no military value. This was pure terrorism." "I know what it was." Catherine's voice was steady. "And if we respond the same way, we prove them right. We prove that all species are the same. That given enough pain, everyone abandons their principles. Then how do we respond? Catherine looked at the medical reports again. We save our people. We show the galaxy what humanity values most, not revenge, not domination, life. The mobilization was massive. Every medical facility on Earth sent personnel and supplies to New Perth. Human colonies across the galaxy contributed resources. Research teams worked around the clock to understand the pathogen and develop treatments. But Earth did not stop there. They sent a message to every allied species asking for help. Medical knowledge, equipment, experimental treatments, anything that might save lives. 27 species responded with aid. Some sent supplies. Others sent their own medical personnel. A few offered research data on similar diseases. It was an unprecedented level of cooperation, all focused on saving human civilians from a biological attack. The Vrakan hardliners watched in confusion as their attack failed to break human resolve. They had expected rage and retaliation. Instead, they got doctors and humanitarian aid. Dr. Rebecca Cross, still recovering from her injuries, volunteered to go to New Perth. Against medical advice, she boarded a transport ship and traveled to the infected colony. When she arrived, she found thousands of patients who needed exactly what the Nightingale crew had tried to provide. "I can help here," she told the exhausted medical staff. "I can still save people." The research breakthrough came from an unlikely source. A Vrakan defector, a junior medical officer who had been horrified by the bioweapon deployment, provided the genetic code for the pathogen. With that information, human scientists accelerated their treatment development. The cure was not perfect. It required intensive care and did not work for everyone. But mortality rates dropped from 40% to 12%, then to 8%. People who would have died started recovering. The death toll stabilized at 38,000. A catastrophic loss, but not the genocide the Vrakan hardliners had intended. New Perth would survive. And humanity would not compromise its principles, even after losing nearly 40,000 civilians to a terrorist attack. The Vrakan defector who had provided the genetic code was granted asylum on Earth. His name was Krell, and he became the first Vrakan to publicly denounce his own empire's actions. "I was taught that mercy was weakness," he said in an interview that aired across the galaxy. "That compassion was a failing. That strength meant being willing to do anything to win. But I watched humans lose thousands of their people and respond by saving lives instead of taking them. That is strength. That is what I was never taught." 3 days after New Perth stabilized, human special forces raided the biological weapons facility where the pathogen had been developed. They captured the scientists and military officers responsible. The evidence was secured. Another trial was scheduled. But the real victory was simpler. The Vrakan Empire had tried to break humanity through atrocity. They had killed tens of thousands of civilians, including children. They had used banned weapons and committed one of the worst war crimes imaginable. And humanity had responded by proving exactly why those weapons should be banned. The galaxy saw everything. They saw human doctors working until they collapsed. They saw civilians donating blood by the thousands. They saw allied species coming together to help. They saw a civilization that valued life so highly that even after a terrorist attack, they refused to compromise their principles. 27 species that had stayed neutral suddenly requested meetings with Earth's diplomatic corps. They wanted to talk about these Geneva Conventions. They wanted to understand how humans could be so strong while still showing mercy. The Vrakan Empire started to fracture. Moderate factions began calling for peace. Military officers refused orders for similar attacks. The bioweapon strategy had failed completely. Catherine Moore addressed the Galactic Council for the first time since walking out months earlier. Her message was simple. You can judge a civilization by how it responds to atrocity. You can measure its strength by what it refuses to become. Humanity has fought terrible wars and learned hard lessons. We will not repeat those mistakes. We will not become monsters to defeat monsters, and we invite every species who shares these values to stand with us. 43 species requested copies of the Geneva Conventions that same day. The internal collapse of the Vracan Empire happened faster than anyone expected. Military defeats could be endured. Strategic losses could be accepted. But watching your enemy suffer massive civilian casualties and respond with medical care instead of vengeance broke something fundamental in Vracan military thinking. Junior officers started refusing orders, not out of cowardice, but out of a growing realization that their doctrine was fundamentally flawed. If humans could win battles while following rules, perhaps those rules were not weakness after all. The moderate faction in the Vracan government had been growing quietly for months. They watched the trials. They saw their military getting systematically dismantled by an enemy that fought smarter, not harder. They received reports from prisoners of war about being treated with dignity and respect. And they realized their empire was on the wrong side of history. The coup happened on a cold morning in the Vracan capital. 3 senior military commanders walked into the High Council chamber with evidence of war crimes committed by their own leadership. They presented communication logs, strategic planning documents, and testimony from soldiers who had been ordered to commit atrocities. "We have brought shame to our people," Commander Vrel announced to the assembled council. "We attacked medical personnel. We used biological weapons against civilians. We murdered prisoners. These are not the actions of warriors. These are the actions of criminals." The hardline leadership tried to have Vrel arrested. Instead, the military forces surrounding the capital pledged loyalty to the moderate faction. The coup was bloodless. By evening, a new government was in place. Their first official act was to request a ceasefire with Earth. President Catherine Moore received the message while reviewing casualty reports from New Perth. The number had been stuck at 38,000 for 2 weeks now. No new deaths, but each number represented a life that should not have been lost. "They want to negotiate," her chief of staff said. "The new Vracan government is willing to surrender the remaining war criminals and discuss peace terms." "What do we know about this new government?" "Moderates mostly. Military officers who opposed the attacks. They're offering full cooperation with our tribunals and suggesting major reforms to Vracan military doctrine." Catherine nodded slowly. This was what they had been fighting for, not conquest, not revenge, but fundamental change. Set up a meeting, neutral territory, and make sure Dr. Cross is invited. The peace conference convened on Alpha Centauri Hub, a massive space station operated by an alliance of independent species. The location was symbolic, neutral ground where no one species held power, a place where agreements could be made without coercion. The Vracan delegation arrived first, led by Prime Minister Vrel. He looked uncomfortable in diplomatic robes instead of military armor. His security escort was minimal, a gesture of good faith that did not go unnoticed. The human delegation included President Moore, Admiral Hunt, Ambassador Williams, and Dr. Rebecca Cross. Rebecca walked slowly, still recovering from her injuries. Her presence sent a clear message. The victims of this war had not been forgotten. The formal negotiations took place in a large conference room with windows overlooking the stars. Representatives from 40 species observed, including members of the Galactic Council. What happened here would set precedents for generations. Vrel spoke first, his voice translated through universal systems. "On behalf of the Vracan people, I offer formal apology for the attack on the medical vessel Nightingale and for all war crimes committed during this conflict. We were wrong. Our military doctrine was flawed. Our leadership betrayed the honor they claimed to uphold." He turned to face Dr. Cross directly. "I cannot undo what was done to you and your crew. I cannot bring back those who were killed. I can only tell you that we understand now what we failed to understand then. Medical personnel are sacred. Mercy is not weakness, and those who committed these crimes will face justice." Rebecca looked at the Vracan leader for a long moment. "Your apology begins the healing, but it cannot erase the harm. My colleagues died believing their medical status would protect them. They were wrong because your people chose violence over basic decency. I know, and I swear to you that the Vrakan Empire will never make that choice again. The negotiations continued for 3 weeks. The terms were discussed, debated, and refined. Earth could have demanded territory, tribute, permanent military restrictions. Instead, they focused on something more important. Change. The final peace agreement included several key provisions. The Vrakan Empire would formally adopt human war conventions, including protections for medical personnel, civilians, and prisoners. All remaining war criminals would be surrendered for trial. A reparations fund would be established for victims' families, but the amount was modest. Earth was not interested in bankrupting the Vrakan economy. The most significant provision was the educational exchange program. Young Vrakan military officers would train alongside human forces, learning tactics and ethics together. Human legal experts would help reform Vrakan military justice systems. Cultural exchanges would promote understanding. "We are not trying to make you into humans," President Moore explained. "We are trying to help you become better Vrakan, warriors who fight with honor, not butchers who commit atrocities." Vrel signed the agreement with a traditional Vrakan blade, a symbolic gesture showing that warriors could embrace peace. Catherine signed with a pen that had belonged to Dr. Patricia Walsh, one of the Nightingale crew who had been executed. But the peace conference accomplished something even more significant than ending one war. 27 species approached Earth's delegation with a request. They wanted help drafting universal war conventions based on human principles. The Galactic Medical Neutrality Compact was signed by 43 species within a month. It established clear protections for medical vessels, personnel, and facilities. Any species signing the compact agreed to respect these protections even during warfare. Violations would be prosecuted through a shared tribunal system. The universal rules of warfare followed 6 months later. Based heavily on Earth's Geneva Conventions, but adapted for galactic context, these rules established standards for treatment of prisoners, protection of civilians, and limitations on weapons of mass destruction. Not every species signed. Some rejected the idea that warfare needed rules, but enough signed that a fundamental shift occurred in galactic civilization. For the first time in recorded history, there was a shared framework for ethical conduct during conflict. Earth had accomplished something unprecedented. They had taken their own painful lessons from centuries of warfare and shared them with the galaxy, not through conquest but through example, not through force but through principle. 5 years after the attack on the Nightingale, Dr. Rebecca Cross stood at the dedication ceremony for a memorial. Station, built at the site where the medical ship had been destroyed, it now served as a hospital facility operated jointly by humans and Vrakan. The station was named Nightingale Memorial. Its medical bays treated refugees from conflicts across the galaxy. Its staff included personnel from 15 species, and its walls carried the names of every person who had died on the original Nightingale. "They died trying to save lives," Rebecca said during her speech, "and their death started something bigger than any of us imagined. They showed the galaxy what happens when we forget that even in war, we are still required to be civilized." The first patient treated at Nightingale Memorial was a young Vrakan soldier injured in a border skirmish. The doctor who saved him was human. The changes did not happen overnight. Civilizations that had fought without rules for thousands of years did not transform instantly. But the precedent had been set, and precedents had power in galactic politics. The first test came 2 years after the peace treaty with the Vrakan Empire. A border war erupted between 2 minor species over disputed mining rights. Both sides had signed the Galactic Medical Neutrality Compact. When one side attacked a hospital station, Earth responded immediately. Not with military force, with something more powerful, evidence and witnesses. Human observers documented the attack. Legal teams presented charges at the shared tribunal. The species responsible faced immediate sanctions from 43 other civilizations. Their trade networks collapsed. Their diplomatic standing evaporated. Within weeks, they sued for peace and agreed to prosecute the officers who had ordered the attack. The message was clear. War crimes had consequences now. The galaxy was watching. Similar incidents followed over the next few years. Each time, the response was swift and coordinated. The universal rules of warfare were not just words on paper. They were enforced by a coalition of species who had agreed that civilization meant something even during conflict. Not everyone followed the rules. Some species rejected them entirely, but they found themselves increasingly isolated. Trade became difficult when most major economies demanded compliance with basic war conventions. Diplomatic relationships strained when governments could not guarantee their military would respect medical neutrality. Economics and politics succeeded where military force might have failed. The Vracan transformation was particularly remarkable. A generation of young officers trained under the new system graduated from joint military academies. They learned human tactical doctrine alongside human ethics. They studied historical battles from Earth and understood why humans fought the way they did. Commander Tarek was one of those young officers. He had been a child when the Nightingale was attacked. Now he served as first officer on a Vracan medical vessel operating in frontier space. The ship was modeled after human designs, with clear medical markings and advanced treatment facilities. "We were taught that mercy was weakness," Tarek explained to a journalist. "But I have seen what human mercy accomplished. They defeated us in battle while showing compassion to prisoners. They suffered a bioweapon attack and responded with medical aid instead of revenge. That is not weakness. That is the strongest thing I have ever witnessed." His ship rescued survivors from a civilian transport that had been caught in crossfire between two warring factions. Among the wounded was a young human girl, maybe 8 years old. Tarek carried her to the medical bay himself and stayed while doctors worked to save her life. "My grandfather fought in the war against Earth," he told the unconscious child. "He would have killed you without hesitation back then. I am saving you because humans taught us a better way." The girl survived. Her name was posted on the ship's honor roll alongside every other life saved. The Vracan crew had adopted the human tradition of remembering each patient they helped, not just victories in battle. Earth's influence continued to spread through more subtle means as well. Human doctors trained medical personnel from dozens of species. Human legal experts helped establish war crimes tribunals on 6 different worlds. Human historians taught courses on the evolution of warfare ethics at galactic universities. Ambassador Williams, who had walked out of the Galactic Council during the Nightingale crisis, now chaired the Committee on Interspecies Military Ethics. The same council chamber that had offered only condemnation now hosted serious debates about enforcement mechanisms and legal standards. "We cannot force every species to follow these rules," she explained during one session. "But we can make it clear that civilization requires certain minimum standards, that medical personnel are always protected, that prisoners have rights, that civilians are not acceptable targets." The vote to establish permanent war crimes courts passed with 72 species in favor. It was not unanimous, but it was progress. Admiral Jessica Hunt retired from military service after 12 years leading the fleet. Her final address to graduating officers at Earth's Naval Academy became legendary. "You may never fight a war," she told the young graduates. "I hope you never have to, but if you do, remember this: we did not become the strongest military force in this region through superior firepower. We became strong through superior principles. Every battle you fight, you represent not just Earth, but an idea. The idea that even in warfare we can remain civilized. Never forget that." Dr. Rebecca Cross never fully recovered from her injuries. She walked with a cane, and her breathing was labored from the damage to her lungs. But she continued her work, now as director of the Interstellar Medical Coalition. The organization coordinated medical responses across species lines, ensuring that hospital ships could operate safely in any conflict zone. On the 10th anniversary of the Nightingale attack, Rebecca returned to the memorial station bearing her ship's name. The facility had grown substantially. What started as a single hospital complex now included research laboratories, training facilities, and refugee processing centers. Tim Reed, the young orderly who had survived the massacre with her, now served as the station's chief administrator. The refugee child they had saved, now a young adult, worked as a medical technician in the trauma unit. "We have treated over 200,000 patients," Tim reported during the memorial ceremony. "From 37 different species. We have not turned anyone away based on which side of a conflict they fought on. We have not allowed politics to override medical necessity." Rebecca looked out at the assembled crowd. Human doctors stood beside Vracan surgeons. Species that had been enemies a decade ago now worked together to save lives. The change was real and measurable. "The crew of the original Nightingale died because someone believed that mercy was weakness," she said quietly. "But their deaths taught the galaxy the opposite lesson. Mercy is strength. Compassion is power, the willingness to help. Even your enemies is the highest form of civilization." She paused, looking at the names carved into the memorial wall. "We did not change the galaxy through weapons or threats. We changed it by refusing to become the monsters we fought against. By showing that even after suffering terrible losses, we would not abandon our principles. That is humanity's gift to the stars. Not technology or tactics, but the hard-won wisdom that some things matter more than victory." The ceremony concluded with a moment of silence for all those lost in the conflict. Then the staff of Nightingale Memorial returned to work. There were patients waiting, and the work of healing never truly ended. Across the galaxy, hospital ships bearing medical symbols flew through war zones without fear. Prisoners of war received treatment according to established protocols. Civilians had protections that were actually enforced. War crimes were prosecuted rather than ignored. The galaxy was not perfect. Conflicts still erupted. People still died in senseless violence, but there were rules now, standards, accountability. And it all started because humanity had learned the hardest lesson of all, that the measure of a civilization is not how fiercely it can fight, but how carefully it can limit the damage when fighting becomes necessary. The Nightingale crew had died trying to heal people. Their legacy was a galaxy that finally understood why that work was sacred, why medical personnel deserved protection, why even in the darkest moments of war, mercy could not be abandoned. Humanity did not conquer the stars with weapons. They transformed them with principles, and that made all the difference.